Hey guys, it's the Double Chen Show.
Hello.
So we talk a lot about Asians, Asian culture, and things like that. And let's talk a little bit about the U.S. We actually lived in different parts of the U.S. where there are a lot of Asians.
Yeah, I think we're pretty representative of different areas.
Except for Hawaii.
Correct.
Because there's a lot of Asians in Hawaii.
Right.
I don't know what they're like.
Me neither. I've never been there.
I mean, I watch Hawaii 5-0, but I can't assume that.
McGarrett!
I do feel like the different geographic locations of Asians have different characteristics.
Absolutely. And that's what we want to talk about, right? Because, at least for me, I grew up in the East Coast now for most of my life. I used to live in the West Coast a little bit, but most of the impressions I have on the East Coast. I grew up in Boston. I've been in New York now for almost 10 years. So what I've seen here, I'm like, this is very different than, we visit the West Coast a lot. And from what you tell me, you're from the West Coast. And I'm like, yeah, this is different, definitely a different vibe. And you find a lot of different types of Asians, and very different from, say, the Midwest, where you're from, too.
I'm going to represent the Midwest, which is all the Asians. We don't have a concentration of Asians, maybe except for in Chicago. But usually Midwest Asians are, we're kind of the fly-by state Asians.
Right. Technically, Mike's geographical area is huge.
Yeah,
but
I lived in Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri,
Yeah.
So I'll rep those parts.
I would say less like Montana and Idaho.
There's no Asians in Montana.
That's what I'm saying. You're like the...
There's literally people in Montana.
And then you'll get somebody comment, I'm from
Montana.
I'm
from Montana, yo. It ain't like that. So you're definitely like Chicago, Ohio, that
whole area. I kind of, that's my characteristic. Yeah.
Although none of us are from the South.
Yeah, like Texas.
So we're missing the
Texas.
South.
It has a huge Asian
I wanna kind of group Texas Asians similar to Midwest Asians.
Well, you might get some flack. You might get some flack for that.
No, I know for a fact. I have so many friends from Texas who are Asian. I feel like they do have a specific kind of, I don't know what it is like there, but they definitely talk about their Asian community in a certain way.
And what about the deep South? What about Asians from
Asians in the deep
Alabama?
South. And then you get
Mississippi, New Orleans. There's no Asians down there, bro.
All right, look. Atlanta, there might be some Asians. I live in Tennessee.
I
live in Tennessee.
All right, deep South, like Mississippi, bro.
I'm telling you, there's not that many
We
Asians in
know
deep South.
somebody who used to live in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, so let's just talk about these bigger geographic demographics of Asians.
That we're familiar with.
Yeah, we're familiar with. Okay, so first of all, East Coast Asians. What are they like?
My first impressions of East Coast Asians are mostly, you got the major Chinatown areas, like say New York, Boston, DC. So you have a lot of new immigrants. And within the new immigrants, we call they're FOBs, right?
Yeah.
Fresh off the boat, fresh off the plane, whatever. So besides, in that category alone, you've got the ones that are literally that came from China.
Yeah.
And then you have kids that, especially in New York, they grew up in Chinatown, but they're American born.
Right.
But they're not American born. They sometimes they even have accents.
Right.
Why? Because when you go to a Chinese school down in Chinatown, everybody speaks English with an accent.
Yeah.
Naturally, you're gonna have an accent.
True. Which is weird. Some people, they might be born in New York,
but they have accents, and a lot of them.
Not like a New York accent, like a Chinese accent.
No, not like, yo, I'm from the Bronx. No, they have a Chinese accent. Now, it's not as thick as my parents,
right?
But it's there. You can hear it.
Yeah.
You can hear it. But also, the lifestyle is very different, right? They hang out with mostly Asians, other Asians in that community, in wherever it is, and then maybe they go to school. Let's say a lot some people we know, they'll go to school around there.
It's usually NYU, Columbia.
The ones that are the ones
Harvard.
that get pushed to go there, but there's also a lot of them that just go to locally. There's a lot of local CUNYs, SUNYs, BMCCs, and there's tons of Asians there.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not just in Columbia. So I think off the top of my head, I get non-natives, right? That's my first impression, because my impression of the West, and you can talk about it, is I feel like there's a lot more if you're American-born Chinese and you live in the West, when we went out to Santa Clara and we saw a high school full of all American-born Chinese, completely different than, say, from Flushing.
It's true. You're right in that sense. I feel like in the Northeast over here, there's a lot of you're right, a lot of maybe the children have come from another place. If they're not born in already this community, a lot of them have come over with their parents at a young age,
right,
or even as teenagers. And also, I feel like there's just a lot of students Well, there's a lot of colleges in the West Coast, but there's a high density of colleges here in the Northeast, and so you got a lot of kids who come even without their parents. They're just well, I wouldn't call them fresh off the boat. I don't know. They're students. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, they're immigrant students.
Yeah,
immigrant students. Yeah,
foreign students that came here.
Yeah,
overseas students that came here.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's definitely another category too.
Another category. Yeah.
Especially in New York and Boston. I know we're like lumping the East Coast. I know there's like DC, blah blah.
Yeah.
But just in those major two cities that we just we go to a lot, abundance of overseas Chinese kids, and they're usually really wealthy, really we call them four or die, or they're just
second generation.
Wealth,
yeah.
So and also exchange students. Technically, my dad was an exchange student.
They're very urbanized. Either they came from every single city in China is huge. Came from a big city, and Asians here, I feel like, are very much anti-nature. Let's go camping. Let's go, spend a week in the mountains.
They're not gonna.
East Coast Asians are like, nah.
Well, I feel like they chose this location to come for a reason. Like, why didn't they go somewhere else?
Well, no, I'm just saying, even Asians that grew up here,
Oh,
they're not
okay,
like, I'm not going camping. I'm gonna go chill at this cafe.
Yeah, I agree with that.
It's the way
I agree
they
with
grew
that.
up, you know. Like if you meet someone from Colorado, they'll be like, "Well, let's go climb some
Or
mountains."
I think that's different than West Coast Asians. I think West Coast Asians are very much into
totally
that.
agree
Yeah,
with
it's true. That is true.
totally agree
I
with that.
totally remember. It was like athletics was like such a big deal.
Yeah,
you know?
like Asians here also, I don't think they work out that often. Like not a lot of Asians here work out.
Wait.
Correction. I think they work out in gyms.
No, I never see Asians in
see
gyms.
a lot of Asians coming from the gym all the time.
On the East Coast, I kind of got to agree with Mike on this one. I see a lot less. Okay, I'll give you an example. When Mike and I go out to the West Coast, we go, we're in California, like, most of the Asian guys, they're fit.
Yeah.
Like, I made that comment to you. I'm looking around, and I'm not checking out guys, but I'm just saying, like these guys are fit in general. On the East Coast, if I see a group of Asian dudes, not fit.
But
they're not like fit,
Okay.
they're just like skinny or...
I agree with you on the guys, but I see a lot of chicks coming from like gyms, like they have their workout gear and they're Asian. They could be Asian Americans or
comparatively though, I don't think there's a lot.
Yeah.
I think
yes.
But I think that has to do with, again, like when you're on the West Coast, you're born into that
That's
culture.
your culture, yeah.
That's the culture.
Because like
outdoors.
me and Dan goes to one of the biggest gyms in the city.
Yeah.
Literally, I think there's 5 Asians in there.
And we're 2 of them.
That's crazy.
That's not fair. I see Asian girls. I don't see any Asian guys working out, sadly, like that often.
Right.
But maybe it's because my school is mostly females. I see them coming from the gym all the time.
Another characteristic I think the East Coast Asians is that a lot of them are finance,
Right.
business.
Yep.
Because of that, I feel like Asians in the East, I feel like, or at least in the Northeast, I feel like they're more superficial.
Really?
In terms of whoever they're dating, they gotta have a certain amount of money. They gotta have a certain amount of lifestyle. I feel like that's the case.
I feel like that too.
I don't feel like that. Have you been to LA? Like, I don't know, like some of my most superficial acquaintances.
Oh, that could be true too.
Some of my most superficial acquaintances live in LA.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I feel like in New York, that's definitely the case as well, especially if you work in finance.
No, of course,
because then you're like, okay, everyone's making this much. I need to date someone who's also making this much because Manhattan's not cheap. We gotta live in Manhattan. We gotta get a 2-bedroom. We gotta do this and that.
Well, I feel like a lot of people here, like a lot of Asians here, and other people, like I feel like the Northeast area is just like an overachieving area. Like, the Ivies are here, people here, like just like they're so like, they're always like, especially in New York, I'm sure this applies to Boston and the other big cities. But it's like people are so like, work, achieve, make some money, marry well, live in big house, like, like not big house, big apartment on like Park or something like that. And I feel like that's the culture. And I feel like a lot of Asians, when they move here or they grow up here, they get assimilated into that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not necessarily an Asian thing because I feel like a lot of people here are like that, no matter what race or ethnicity. In the West Coast, you got more space, you got more sun. I don't know, like climate stuff affects people, maybe like that kind of weather, that kind of environment, just it makes a more laid back kind of personality. And here it's more like cramped and
that's true.
And fast paced.
It's more dense.
Dense, so people more like,
And I feel like the 3, let's say we're just comparing East Coast, Northeast, West, and Middle. I'll say this. I feel like the Northeast is very Asian. The Asians are very Asian.
Okay.
I feel like the West they're Asian, but they're more progressive.
Yeah,
they're American.
Definitely.
But in the middle, they want to be white.
Really?
Yeah, I feel like the middle, they kind of
fascinating.
identify themselves as being white. Like where I come from, think about this. Like in the Midwest, when you grow up, you're basically surrounded by white people,
right?
Or like other kinds of people who are not Asian. And I grew up, or a lot of these people will grow up being like, I don't really identify with Asian culture,
right?
So I feel like a lot of these people who live in Michigan, Missouri, whatever, they're kind of like, all right, I kind of lost that aspect of myself,
right?
And I even wished I was white when I was younger.
Right.
I wished I was white. I'm like, I even tried to. This is so stupid. When I was a kid, I tried to dye my arm hair blonde. So
my god!
I'm like,
what arm hair? You have no.
I know. I didn't know that. I was like, oh, I want to be white.
Why didn't you dye your hair blonde? Because that's what everybody was doing.
I was like 8. Like, that's dumb.
That's why, like, for me, I don't like it when Asians hate on other Asians because they deem them whitewashed. Like, I don't agree with that. Like, that is a stereotype. Like, all my friends said, Dan, you're whitewashed. Like, okay, I was kind of like, grew up in the same situation as you. I didn't have Asian people around me. So, it's not like I could choose. It's like to me, the definition of whitewash would be like, you got a bunch of Asians and you got a bunch of white people or non-Asians, and you go, I'm going to come over here. I had no one, just like you. Like, I had no one around.
Boston.
There was no Asians around.
What do you mean? There's no Asians in Boston.
In the early to late 90s, I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Every single year I was in school from 6th grade until 12th grade, I was the only Asian in that class.
The viewpoints on perspectives on life are different between the different Asian groups.
Yep.
I feel like in New York, it's more like career.
Yep.
My job. That's
career.
That's most important. I feel like in the West Coast, it's more of a balance, like a career, but also one life. In the Midwest, I feel like Asians are like, I want to get married by 22, 23. White picket fence. Like, kind of like
they assimilate to the Americanized.
That's what I wanted.
Yeah.
I was like, I graduated college. I need to get married now.
Right.
Because that's what everyone else is doing.
I mean, I definitely I wasn't like, go to get married, have a white picket fence house, because I grew up on the East Coast where people were more independent and they were like, I want to date for a while and they're all settled down really late. So I was of that mindset.
Right.
Like, so yeah, I could definitely see like being a product of like and I think one of the funny things that happens is like when you're in a suburban area, like in Palo Alto or northern or southern California, like Alhambra, you see a lot more. This is gonna be more stereotypical. You see a lot more of like the Asian. Like the people that modify their cars. I don't know what you call that. There's a word for that. Like car
Tokyo
junkies.
drifters.
Tokyo drifters.
I don't know.
In the East Coast, like, sorry, if you live in New York, you're living in a really cramped space.
Right.
Unless you live in Long Island, and there's not a lot of Asians in Long Island. But in California, everyone's got a garage.
Yeah.
Everyone drives. And you're gonna find
cars are a big deal.
Cars are a big deal.
Yeah.
So I never met in the East Coast a guy that's like, yo, Dan, check out under my hood. No.
Well, where are you gonna use that
That's
gear?
what I'm saying.
Like drive out to like Connecticut.
I was driving like Ford Escapes in high school, But when I met my cousin out in Chicago in the Midwest, him and his Asian friends. I thought I was in an episode of Fast and Furious. They took me in their souped-up Toyotas to an area where they drag raced. I was like, it's all Asians and maybe a couple of white dudes. Like, yeah, I like that. Like Paul Walker, coming out like, what you got under that hood? But I think that the West and the Midwest is more conducive to that stereotype.
Yeah, I think Midwest doesn't have any of that.
You just don't think it has
We don't have any of that. We're like the most not laid back, just the most, I guess, regular folks you'll ever find. Mm-hmm. Like Asians in the Midwest are just like, whatever. I'm just gonna live my life, have some kids.
Yeah, okay.
That's what we do. We don't drag race. We don't do anything.
Well, maybe that's just the culture in the Midwest.
No, that is.
Yeah.
Because we assimilated to that culture.
Exactly.
If you go to Iowa, there's not a lot of exciting stuff going on in Iowa. And we kind of do whatever everyone else is doing.
I kind of like that. I don't know, like,
it's the most boring crap ever. No,
I don't know. I've only lived in the West Coast and the East Coast where there's a lot of Asians, and even in America, whenever I went to school, I was like 70% Asian, and this is including all sorts of Asians, like Chinese, Korean, Japanese, a Filipino, and then Indian, wherever. Like, it's just like Asian as a collective took up about 70-something% of my school population. And so I was like, I never felt like an outcast. I never felt like I was like different. Like, I guess I was lucky to not have grown up with like what people like in the Midwest might experience as racism and everything like that. So yeah, I mean, I would have to say growing up with the West Coast was really interesting. I was always way more relaxed in the West Coast. There was like places to drive my car, places to park my car. My apartment was bigger. You know, food was
more abundant.
More abundant. Hey, California is like the bread state, bread basket state. So and avocados were cheaper. Yay!
Because New York is an entry point for everyone in the world.
Yes, yes.
So that's why you get the different kinds. Because we're talking a lot about Chinese right now. Like, I think in New York, for example, like there's a lot of Asians that they don't assimilate to American culture. It's almost
they
like
don't need to.
They don't need to. They have their own community.
They enjoy everything New York has and more, and they have their own friends.
Yeah, if you go to certain parts of New York, obviously Chinatown, right? But there's also, those of you who don't know, there's Koreatown, Manhattan, but there's a much bigger Korea district in Queens.
In Queens,
yes.
Where basically everywhere you go,
Korea City.
They're speaking Korean.
Right. And this is not a criticism of the Koreans or the Japanese or Chinese that live in New York and that don't want to assimilate or even kind of be a part of the more westernized community. It's not a criticism, but what I'm saying is they don't want to. All the signs, basically they're happy in their own community, and you definitely see that. Well, I'm not saying it's great or bad. I'm just saying I think you see that really only in New York on the East Coast.
And LA.
LA too.
And
so
LA.
LA have Alhambra, which is mainly Chinese.
Yeah.
And it has this other city, I don't know, it's mainly Korean places. But also I feel like the different ethnic groups of Asians, we tend to be in different areas, except for Chinese people. Chinese people are everywhere.
Yeah.
But then Japanese people, I feel are not, a lot of them are in the East Coast. Most of them are in the West Coast. San Francisco has a big Vietnamese population, but not in New York.
Right. But do you feel I get the feeling that these Asian communities in New York are less inclined, they're way more concentrated in their own culture. They don't want to not let people in, but I feel do you get the feeling that they're less open to kind of reach out to the outside world a little bit and then keep everything within the community?
I feel it's out of necessity because like we were just discussing, a lot of new immigrants come to the Northeast, right? And the entry point is generally New York. So a lot of people stay in New York and try to build a life here. And when you first come, you don't speak the language. It's really impossible, and it's really hard to assimilate. But because there's already existing this kind of community, so they obviously find it to be comforting where you can speak the language and whatnot. The downside is you might stick in this community for too long and find it harder to assimilate, because I know for a lot of Asians who move elsewhere, maybe into the Midwest or something, they don't have a choice. They have to assimilate. They don't assimilate, then they can't talk to anybody.
I feel the Midwest kind of strips your culture a bit, because I remember when I was in college and I remember my friend dragged me to this Chinese association meeting, and I stayed for 30 minutes because I felt I had zero connection with these people.
Right.
I'm nothing in common with you guys, and they're mainly exchange students that came over directly from China or Taiwan or whatever. And I'm I can't be here because you guys, we don't relate at all.
I enjoy having those communities. When I come to Flushing, when I go to Chinatown, I find things that are familiar to me, and I haven't been back to China for so long, but it's nice to find certain things that I don't get. If I move somewhere out in the middle of America, I won't be able to access those things that I find to be very familiar to me and that bring back my childhood memories. So I enjoy that aspect of having those cultural kind of hubs.
I mean, regardless of where you are, I feel there's it's good to understand about your surroundings and other parts of your country that similar people might be residing and the differences that they might be experiencing.
Yeah. Not to stereotype anybody.
No. So one thing we couldn't really discuss is the South. I mean, I'm gonna group you guys with the Midwest because you guys are kind of like us, right? I don't know.
But if you guys if any of you guys are from the South, please comment and tell us what it's like and
what it's like now.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. See you.
Bye.